asking everyone. So you will see that, okay, so we should always follow the law. We should always follow the government, and it's fine. But what's the difference in democracies and autocracies? So take the TikTok, for example. Is TikTok banned in the US right now? No, right? So several years ago, when in the first term of Donald Trump, he says that, oh, TikTok is a national security threat to the US. And he used an executive order to stop TikTok functioning in the US. That is the first Donald Trump term. Okay, and what happened? What happened in I think it's 2020 or 2019? Trump orders by an executive order to stop the functioning of TikTok. And then what happened? What happened there? TikTok is still open, still running, right? So that time, the judicial system just stopped the executive order to stop the running of TikTok. So it is called checks and balance. When the government wants to do something to limit people's behaviors or to regulate people's behavior, then it must go through a certain kind of process. So that is, you should have some laws that is passed, discussed, and passed by the Congress. And then it will always be a judicial case in the court, that the court do some constitutional review, make sure that, okay, this law is fine. And then we can limit people's behavior in democracies. So that's why it takes more than 2-3 years. So since the hearings, many years just passed by, and TikTok is still there, right? When we want to limit TikTok, then we must go through all of the discussions of the democratic institutions and then the judicial systems. And here, right now, he finally proves a plan to ban the TikTok. Okay, but TikTok is still there, right? Because now Donald Trump says that no, TikTok is fine. Okay, so they're still fighting there. But my point is that, yeah, we can always do something to limit people's right, like freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is not unlimited, so we can control that. We can limit that, but in democracy, we should go through all of the legislative process, okay? But in autocracies, then they can have the so-called national security law or all other laws that requires you to do everything, okay? Also, did you hear that the congressman also point out another evidence that Biden is controlled by CCP? Anyone who want to try? Did you hear any, in the very beginning, the congressman just indicated another evidence that the top official of TikTok is doing what? Did you hear anything about that? 就是在那个除了那个国家安全法2017年国家安全法之外呢，那个国会议员又问那个周受资说，哎，那你们还有一件事情是可以证明你们是被 CCP control。 Did you hear that? Anyone who want to try? That is the top official of TikTok is what? Did you hear that? Okay, so the top official, I think it's top something. The leader of a section is a party secretary of CCP. So that is very important because in China, every companies, every institutions, every schools, every sections will have a member from CCP. So that is called 党组织. Okay, so the party branch is everywhere, and it is regulated by law. So it's required that everywhere should have a party members there. So for example, in the school, there will be a party member, the party secretary of the school. And in our department, there will be a party secretary of the department. Okay, so it is required by laws that everywhere, the party members everywhere. So Mr. Zhou, the CEO, Zhou Shouzhi, did not answer to that question. Okay, so very different. They're very different institutions in democracies and autocracies. So yeah, so some logistics of the class. We will not have a class next week. So I apologize for that because, well, our budget for the field work and the seminars are delayed. So I cannot arrange for that. But the makeup plan is that I will arrange for, in the next week, after the class, we will have a book show. But that may not be in English. So I arrange another English seminar in the noon in the following weeks. So I may have another one. So yeah, this can count for the additional, I mean the seminar notes requirement. 就是这个可以当做那个就是那个讲座的那个记录。So we have a seminar note requirement, right? So this can count one. So I will arrange one. I think the topic will be about Indo-Pacific strategy. So it's all about how the democracies respond to the rise of China. So tentatively in the next 2 weeks. So I will have another one also in the noon. Okay. I'm still trying to do some field work, perhaps in the first week of May, second week of May. Yeah. So it's a tentative plan right now. Okay. So here's a book. Maybe an interesting book. It's called 跳舞的熊, Dancing Bears. It's from an author from Poland. So it basically describes that in the new democracies, everyone must learn how to live under democracies. So there's a lot of authoritarian legacies. So I mention this because we have a lot of debates right now on how to or whether we should limit some of the freedom of speech. For example, can people promote China's using force to unify Taiwan in here? Or can we promote war? Can we promote violence? Something about that. And so this book is a novel. So it describes a lot of stories on how people adapt to the new systems and how people discuss about the boundaries of the limitations. So so far, do you have any questions about that? About the course so far? Okay. Okay, so a very quick recap that, yeah, please.
How long will the
You mean?
field work?
Oh, just to our class, the time of our class, between 10 and 12. So I'm still trying to do that. Okay, I really apologize for that because, again, the chaos in the legislature of Taiwan just delayed everything. Yeah. So the personalist dictatorship, just the power is concentrated in the dictator itself. The political parties do not have the power, and there's no autonomous institutions. The military is just under control of the leader, cannot make constraints. So there's a personalist dictatorship. And we also see the outcomes of personalization is quite negative. So more corruption, more clientelism, there's more interstate wars because there's no constraint on the leaders. When leader makes some bad decisions, nobody can control him or nobody can persuade him not to do so. Okay, so and very unstable policies. Well, we can also see some negative effects in democracies, right? If the dictator, if the leaders in democracies, when their decision-making process or decision-making groups is very small, when there's only one voice, very similar minds there, then it is still can be very dangerous in democracies. Okay, so if you read some of the news recently, so for example, there's a lot of news on Washington Post, Financial Times, and a lot of major media describing how Mr. Trump making decisions. Then you will find that everyone in his team, there's no different opinions. Okay, so that could be very dangerous as well. But again, the difference there between democracy and autocracy is that there's always checks and balances in democracies. Okay. We also learned from the Logic of Political Survival. It's a book by 4 authors, and I always call the first author BBDM because of the abbreviation of the name. So the Logic of Political Survival, they use this framework to analyze every regime. So there's very little difference between democracy and autocracies in this framework. OK， 就是在这个政治生存的逻辑那个书里面，就是他们是用这个去分析不同的政权。那在这样的状况下呢，民主跟独裁的那个差异就非常小。他们只是看说那个winning coalition 跟 selectorate 的大小。So the only important factor here in this framework is the size of different groups. So winning coalition, the key leading group in this regime. Selectorate is the one who are eligible of becoming the winning coalition. So in democracies, the selectorate is equivalent to all of the citizens who can vote, right? So I argue that in democracies, the leader should take care of everyone because they can determine who is controlling the power. But in autocracies, there's very little control by the selectorate. So for example, we do not know who are eligible of voting for the congressman in China. 就是在中国，我们不知道全国人大是怎么选的 ，OK？ 所以那个 selectorate 是很不确定是谁 ，OK？OK, here comes today's main topic, the power sharing mechanisms. Okay, so today we read 2 chapters from Milan Svolik. He's now in Princeton, I think, or you can Google which institutions he's staying now. So Professor Svolik, this classic book on the politics of authoritarianism, is in the book. It basically describes that there are 2 main challenges for the leader, the dictator. One is to keep elites loyal. One is to keep the masses support. Okay, so the elites and masses brings different challenges or different demands for the dictators. Okay, so the puzzle is why a dictator cannot always rule by his own. So you may wonder, the dictator controls the violence, controls the guns, and why cannot just suppress everything, every dissident? 就是为什么独裁者不能够完完全全的靠他自己统治？为什么他不能够完完全的靠武力镇压就好 ？Why? Why a dictator have to cooperate with the mass or with some of the loyals there? Why cannot he just rely on the military or rely on the coercive institutions? Have you think of it? So for example, 蒋介石, okay, Chiang Kai-shek, he created a party, political party, KMT, and KMT established the party branches into every township in Taiwan. But in the same time, there's a white terror, that is, he controls for the military, there's a secret police, and there's a lot of political persecutions. Why Chiang Kai-shek still want to build up political parties and party branches? Why not just using the military and the police and the coercive institutions? 为什么独裁者还要靠政党 ？Yeah, please.
Later, be their member or their party. So they have to build a party, or they keep elites loyal to make their legitimacy keep on their party, not the military.
So you mean the military is a small group of people, and then the dictator wants to expand the legitimacy, or that is the support from a larger group. That is a party. Is that what you mean? He wants to expand the legitimacy, or that is the support, right? Legitimacy is support. It's basically the support from people. People think that you are the leader. You can exercise your power. That is the definition of legitimacy, right? Yeah. So he wants to expand the support. So yeah, but still, how he expand the legitimacy? By creating a party. Yeah, please.
I mean, it creates the image that there is a large group of people in power that are involved in believing that this one person is in power.
Mm-hmm.
Like it creates the idea that there is a structure to the overall government that is ultimately led by one person, as opposed to like that person is the only image there is.
But he still can use the violence, right? Why he want to rely on another tools? I mean, he can create this structure by force, by violence. But why is that there's a structure there, political parties there, or even legislature, nominally democratic institutions? Why is it the case? Why? I mean, because the dictator controls the guns, he can just kill everyone who dislike him. But why not? Why is there a need to recruit more? Yeah, please.
Because even if the dictator has the power or the military power to enforce his rule, at some point people realize that the risk is worth taking going up against the dictator. So he needs to expand his base in order for the nation to accept it.
Yeah. So basically, guns cannot always keep support, right? So if you kill everyone who does not like you, then it will make more people that dislike you, right? So you cannot use guns to keep others loyal to you or support you, right? So you have to come up with some other ways besides the guns, besides the violence, right? So you can maybe temporarily remove some of the people that does not like you, but you cannot keep it for a very long time. You still have to rule the country. You still have to develop the economy, right? You still have to run the whole government. So you cannot only rely on institutions that is coercive, okay? So we see this, and the most challenging side is that if you rely on the coercive institutions, then these coercive institutions can turn back to you. So this is all of the dictators that removed unconstitutionally. Okay, so after World War II, there are about 600-700 of dictators. Half of them are removed unconstitutionally, so they cannot finish their term. Okay, so half of them, so about 300. Okay, and among these 300 removed unconstitutionally, so 3/4 of them are removed by regime insiders, including military coup and assassination. So that includes, I mean, you can see 3/4, 3/4是被精英直接给就是杀了之类的。So you rely on the coercive institutions of violence, then this violence can turn back to you anytime. Like military coup and assassination. It's all violence. Okay? So you cannot always rely on just one apparatus. You have to, just like mentioned earlier, that the dictators have to expand the legitimacy. Okay. So dictators do not fare well after leaving, exile, imprisoned, or killed. Okay. So especially in personalist regime. So in the personalized, highly personalized regime, the dictators are, well, almost 70% of the dictators are just removed, and they are having a very bad situations after they leave power. OK， 就是在独裁者在那个个人式的独裁底下呢，这个独裁者过得特别不好，因为他们有70%的机会，要不就是被杀了，要不就是流亡，要不就是被关起来之类的。OK， so we have two main tools of ruling for dictators. One is coercion. So it's police, secret agents, or military. That's coercion. But you also have to use some of the co-optation. Co-opt. The verb is co-opt. So the noun is co-optation. Okay. So co-optation is running by these institutions like parties, elections, some of the political freedom, some of that, and clientelism. Okay. So political party, and that is very essential factor in democracies. So there's a famous quote by a political science master. I don't know how to pronounce correctly. It's Schacht-Schneider. So Professor Schacht-Schneider, he says that modern democracy is unthinkable safe in terms of parties. 这个 safe 应该是指一个容器或者是一个机制之类的。Modern democracy is unthinkable safe in terms of parties. So every democracies are run by parties. So the basic function of democracy is the competition of parties. The parties will recruit people into the elections, and the parties, they compete for the political power, right? However, most of dictators also have a party. Most of them have a party. But the function of the party varies a lot, okay? So why do dictators need an institution? Why most of them have political parties and the nominal democratic party institutions? Because they want to prolong their political survival. The easy answer is that. So they want political survival, okay? So the parties are not just propaganda. So the parties or some nominally democratic institutions like elections, legislatures, they do work in non-democracies, in autocracies. 就是在威权国家呢，这些名义上的民主机制，就包括政党啦、选举啦，然后这个国会啦等等，他们确实是会有一些功能的，当然不会像民主国家这样的功能。Okay, so for example, this is Chiang Kai-shek in Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall. So there are three main slogans: ethic, democracy, and science. Okay, so dictators always have the slogan they do not have. Okay, so for example, China's slogan is that Taiwan is part of China. Because Taiwan is not part of China, so this makes it their slogan. Okay, so there's a slogan. The slogan for Chiang Kai-shek is ethic, democracy, and science. That is what he does not have. So there's a slogan for that. Okay. Do you know the ethic? Why I say that Chiang Kai-shek does not have the so-called ethics? No. Well, I don't know how to describe it in English, but he says what is a verb for having sex with prostitutes? So Chiang Kai-shek in the in his diaries says that he often goes to visit the how to say that就是那个妓女怎么讲？Okay, 就是 so he is he has a very chaotic relationship in sex. Okay, and he writes in the diary. So there's ethics. I mean, so that's what he does not have. Okay, and also he kills many people. That cannot be called ethics, right? Democracies and science. Okay. So overall results of Svobodik point out that authoritarian regimes that co-opt via party with some of the organizational features will survive under less favorable circumstances. So basically, if there's a party and the party do work in some circumstances, then it helps the dictators to prolong their political survival. Okay. So this is also the book we mentioned that there's a lot of nominally democratic institutions in dictatorships. So they learn how to use this institution to help them to survive. Okay. So think of in a dictatorship, what are the pros and cons of political openness? So for example, freedom of press. Okay. If you are dictators, do you want to open for freedom of press? Do you want there's an independent media that can criticize you, or they can investigate the corruption cases in the government? What are pros and cons for a media or the freedom of press there? 就是在独裁国家，如果你开放给那个新闻自由的话，会发生什么事 ？Pros and cons. It's quite easy for the cons, right? So for dictators, you don't want anyone who criticizes you, right? If there's a freedom of media, then the media can always criticize you, and they can investigate some of the corruption cases, some of the bad infrastructure cases, a lot of scandals, right? So that will hurt dictator's legitimacy, right? But what is the pros? What is the positive side of openness for the freedom of press? Can you think of any reasons that the dictator want to open? Yeah. Any kind of positive side. What are yeah?
I mean, like, maybe maybe it creates the idea that they're not such an oppressive ruler, that they still have control, but maybe it puts out the idea that they actually are open to the population making decisions.
That's very good. That is a very good answer. So yeah, so the dictators pretend that he is quite open. He pretends to give you some of the political rights, okay? And then the leader can just claim that, oh, I'm very open. So you do have the freedom, okay? And then what is the purpose of making people to believe that? 就是这个独裁者他今天会说，好，就是我给你一些言论自由啊。那接下来这个对于民众来说会怎么想？ Yeah, please.
Well, maybe it anchors like the nature of the regime, like in the minds, like and also like on several generations, I would say. But also to come back on the previous questions of the pros and cons of political openness, I would also say that we live in a world where we're getting like more and more interconnected. So living in autarky is like not really like possible anymore. Like I think if you want to generate like positive externalities like for your people, or if you pretend to care about the people. So for example, to come back on like China and Deng Xiaoping openness, like the openness of the regime, I think in order for China to be like more integrated like in the global world, that was maybe a leverage to do so.
Yeah, so basically your answer is that the dictator pretends to be openness, and then the Western world will welcome such a so-called reform or openness, and then to cooperate with the dictators. Yes, that is another reason. So to convince the Western democracies that, oh, I'm open, so I can cooperate with you. That is what Deng Xiaoping did, and also that is what Mr. Putin did in the early is his presidency. Okay, so he pretends to be open. Okay, very good. So what are the internal concerns for the dictators in within the country? Can you think of any positive reasons for the dictators for political openness? Yeah, please.
People may be satisfied while they have some of freedom, so they won't do anything out of leaders' control or not in their administration.
Yeah, sure. Yes, that is very good. So that will make people to believe that they do enjoy some of the human rights. They do enjoy some of the openness. So that also work on other institutions like elections. Yeah, please.
One of the pros as well is that with political openness, it allows the dictator to see the cracks in the system very early and to address the few causes that might put into question their rule. Because if the people cannot express their feelings, it just takes more and more space and then it exposes more and more.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is what we are going to talk about later. So for the dictators, he has to rule. He has to run the government, right? But if there's no freedom of speech, there's no way to know what people want. There's no way to examine what you did. There's no way to see whether people are satisfied with your ruling. And there's no way that you do understand your societies, okay? So to acquire information, okay? So right now we have several answers there. To have the legitimacy, to have a good image on international world, and also to expand, to give people some of the satisfaction, to give people some of the space to express. And also, for the dictators, maybe the most important part is to have the information he needs. Okay? So here comes the dictator's dilemma. So especially on freedom of speech. From this book, The Political Economy of Dictatorship I think it's in 1995. Okay? Openness of freedom of speech leads to criticisms. And some of the dictators cannot tolerate any kind of criticisms. However, closeness leads to unknown information. So the dictators cannot know what is the overall satisfactions of the society. Okay, so there's some of the solutions here. One, the dictator can use some of the secret police to gather some of the information he needs. So for example, the secret police can be everyone, can be normal people here, and to see whether people have dissatisfaction on the government. They collect people's opinion. They monitor people's activities, okay, for the dictators. Another side is that they open to some of the freedom of speech or freedom of press, so that they can control for that, okay? 就是在对于独裁者来说，他有两种不同的解方，一种呢就是用秘密警察去跟社会互动，好，然后去监控社会，然后但他一方面又可以跟社会打交道，一方面监控社会，一方面呢他就是或者是另外一种方式就是独裁者他会开放部分的新闻自由部分，然后他可以继续控制这样子 ，OK， so for dictators, there's also another dilemma. That is, coercive institutions can be very helpful. They can just suppress all the oppositions. They can remove people that dictators does not like. Okay, but the dilemma is that. So let me finish this. So if you give these coercive institutions less resources, so that the institutions can, what the institution can do is that they can only rely on brutal ways because they cannot target specific, people in the society. If you give too much resources for the coercive institution, then the coercive institutions can maybe turn back to you. Okay, so for the coercive institutions, I mean, if the dictators want to make them very powerful, then it also raises the risk of coup. But if you do not give them enough resources, then they cannot suppress opposition for you. 就是对于独裁者来说，如果你给那些强制机构太多的资源的话，他们有可能会反过来政变，你有可能会增加你的政变的这个几率。但如果你不给他们足够的资源的话，他们就会没有办法精准的打击，没有办法精准的打击你想要打击的人。那所以最后他们就会变得，就是这些coercive institution 就会变得非常的残忍，因为他只能够不怕，就是他们说不怕，就是只能够宁可错杀100，也不要放掉1个，的那个意思。So for dictators, they have two dilemmas. One, whether they want to rely on the institutions other than coercive ones. OK， 就是他们到底要不要开放给不是强制性的机构，不是暴力性的机构。The second dilemma is whether they how much resources they want to put in the coercive institutions. If you make a coercive institution too powerful, then you will be very risky of a coup. But if you make them less powerful, then they will be very brutal. So for example, in the beginning of Chiang Kai-shek, in 1950s and 1960s, there's a lot of prosecutions because Chiang Kai-shek just want to avoid the risk of coup. So he creates a lot of different institutions, different coercive institutions. So they just make them very brutal. Okay. So let's have take a rest. OK， 好，是200元。
对，
好，
我记得是。
OK，
我拿确认一下。
好，应该是。
OK。
I have the introduction as well. On the introduction, zero concept. The last member is not here yet. Yeah, she said that at the beginning.
This is a question for today. only 10% of people got the second one right. And half of people got the first one wrong. I mean, I just mentioned it. That's that's correct. Right. Well, I started to worry about your final exam, right? Because this will be very similar to the final exam. Okay. I mean, the type of the question will be very similar to this. Okay. So this is just a kind of practice. Okay, so first one only, okay, less than 60% right, and the second one only 15% got it right. Okay. So the first one is about BBDM, right? There's a very little difference between democracy and autocracy because they are in their framework. I say that they deliberately says that there's no difference. The only difference is size. But in their final chapter, they also mention that, well, there is indeed some of the difference. That is the laws, the rule of law, and a lot of legal framework in democracy is there. But the leaders' behaviors are very similar in every kind of institutions. So the leader only cares about who can remove them, who can threaten them. Okay, so that is why their book, the title, the subtitle is 为什么坏行为总是好政治？因为好政治就是要那个巩固政权。Okay, so the bad behavior is always a good politics because the priority is always to consolidate power. Okay, and what is not included in the BBDM suggestion for political survival? The fourth one is pay key supporters a lot of resources to keep them loyalty. Actually, you only have to pay just enough to keep supporters loyalty. Okay, just enough. You don't have to pay too much, just enough. Because for the mass, you have to create a structure that makes your supporters rely on the dictators. So just enough, just enough. What is not a sign of personalization of dictators? Cooperation with the army. No, you don't have to cooperate with the army. You control the army. Okay. So when there's no constraint, I mean, when the military or the party cannot constrain the leader, cooperation means that you listen to them, you negotiate with them, you do something with them, right? That is called cooperation. So if it is a personalization, then the dictator controls the army. You don't have to cooperate with them. Okay? Okay, so let's do the presentation right now.
How do we put our
Yeah.
presentation? I'll make it a bit more because I also have an introduction. Is it good? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Right. So hello everyone. Today we'll be talking about Mao Zedong and the early People's Republic of China.
Can you introduce your name first?
My name is Basili, and I don't know the name of everyone. So first of all, very quickly, we present who is Mao Zedong. So he was born in central China in Hunan province in 1893, so under the Qing dynasty. And one important detail is he was born in a relatively rich farmer family, which allowed him to go to secondary school in Changsha and then go to Beijing University, which is an important part of his life because he came relatively early into contact with European philosophy and especially communist philosophy. He's the main figure of the Communist Party of China, and he was also a military general, which also will be an important part of his character later. And he was one of the three main founders of the Communist Party of China in 1921 during the first National Congress of the Communist Party of China in Shanghai. We will have four parts. First of all, I will be talking about the Chinese Civil War and Mao Zedong's rise to power, and then my colleague will talk about the political system and inner workings, the consequences and main policies of Mao's rule, and finally, the international role of China under Mao's rule. So first of all, I'll be talking, as I said, about the Chinese Civil War and his rise to power. First of all, the world era and the national betrayal. So one thing that many people know about China is China after 1916 was divided into many different zones of influence called, it's called the world era. So the huge yellow part is the most important part. It was the Republic of China, and then different warlords controlled different parts of China. And at this time, the KMT, so the Kuomintang, was established in southern China, and the Communist Party of China didn't really have any foothold. And after the death of the president of the Republic of China, really China exploded into many parts. The main event is the alliance between the Communist Party of China and the Kuomintang. So communist executive joined the Nationalist Party in order to lead a joint revolution. This was under Stalin's advice, and the goal was later to betray the KMT. But the KMT, after leading a successful military offensive in the north of China, betrayed the communists and began the Chinese Civil War between the Republic of China and the Communist Party. At this time, in 1927, there was the Chinese massacre and communist purges, and Mao's forces had to seek refuge in Jing'an Mountains, so around here in China. And at this time, it's very important, Mao wrote a political manifesto, which was the report on the investigation of the peasant movements in Henan, and this is the founding moment of Maoism theory, which diverged from Marxist theory in that he believes that the communist revolution in China comes not from the factories, but from the farmers. And so then we enter the second part, which is the early Chinese Civil War. The Chinese Red Army engaged for 4 years in guerrilla warfare against the Republic of China, and in 1931, the Chinese Red Army took control of many provinces in southern China, namely Jiangxi, and proclaimed the Chinese Soviet Republic. Later in 1934, the Republic of China engaged in huge anti-communist campaigns in order to crush the communist cells, and this is very important because this marks the beginning of the Long March, which is an event in which Mao Zedong led 100,000 communist troops to leave the Jiangxi Soviets and EU1 Soviets up into Yan'an base area. This is very important because even though communist forces were crushed, only 8,000 soldiers made it out of the initial 100,000. This solidified Mao's rule because he achieved a lot of desperate military victories, which is the founding point of the cult of personality around Mao Zedong. And in 1936, a peace treaty was signed between the KMT and the CPC in order to fight Japanese invasion. And finally, during the war, communist forces took up a lot of influence because since there were so few, they acted as reconnaissance battalions that got behind enemy lines, controlled supply lines, and recruited many more soldiers. By the end of the war, the Chinese Red Army had around between 500,000 and 1 million soldiers, which is enormous. And after the war, the Second World War, the Civil War resumed, and communist forces expelled the Republic of China to the island of Taiwan, and on the 1st of October 1941, the People's Republic of China was proclaimed. So just quickly, this is a map of China before the Second World War, the anti-Japanese war, and you can see that many different areas are controlled by many different people, and all of these areas are allied to the nationalist China, so the Republic of China, and this small part is the Communist Party of China controlled area. And right after the end of the war, the red part is controlled by Communist China because they had alliance with the Soviet Union, and it allowed them to sweep across China and expel the Republic of China on the island of Taiwan. And now my friend will be talking about the political steps and inner workings of the world.
Okay, we'll now see the political system and inner working under Mao Zedong rule. So Mao Zedong made his name through radical and highly controversial policies. His reign was characterized by three structural phases: political campaigns aimed at solidifying the CCP's foundations, an extraordinary personality cult, and strategic diplomacy that redefined China's place in the world. From the early years of the rise of power, Mao launched political campaigns aimed at strengthening control of the CCP and diffusing any opposition. One of the most emblematic initiatives was the 100 Flowers movement from 1956 to 1957, during which Mao encouraged intellectuals and the general public to criticize the party's policies in order to reform its functioning. But criticism soon provided the ammunition used against the party, prompting Mao to launch the anti-dissent campaign from 1957 to 1959. The repression of any dissident behavior masterfully crossed the lines, with hundreds of thousands of opponents persecuted, so that an authoritarian regime was reinforced and any political plurality stifled. These campaigns are emblematic of Mao's strategy of openly ideological and politically motivated purges to consolidate his power, including the elimination of opposition both within and outside the country. At the same time, Mao established a cult of personality at the center of his reign. Through omnipresent propaganda and mass mobilization, he was erected as a quasi-god within the Chinese society. The state media constantly extolled his merits and his ability to lead China to prosperity while attacking Western imperialism. His Little Red Book, a collection of quotations, were brandished as a symbol of loyalty by millions of citizens. The culmination of his cult was reached during the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976, which mobilized young people throughout the Red Guards to fight against the enemies of socialism, in particular intellectuals and certain party members. While this cult unified the country under his vision, it also caused general disorder, ruining many lives and institutions. Internationally, Mao was determined to establish China independence from the powers that be. The UN recognized the PRC in 1971, a major step forward. The seat had been occupied for several decades by Taiwan, as we know, but which had managed to keep it for reasons relating to the geopolitical stakes involved in the Cold War. Several factors contributed to these developments, in particular the growing rapprochement of Western countries with China to counter Soviet expansionism, and a growing awareness of the demographic and therefore geopolitical wave of the PRC. This led to the adoption of the Resolution 2758 by the General Assembly, formalizing Beijing as the sole legitimate representative of China. This diplomatic success reinforced Beijing One China policy, which consists in isolating Taiwan internationally, confirming and confining it to a form of suzerainty and ceasing to exist internationally under the name of Taiwan. And my colleague will now explain the consequences of the Mao's policy.
So the next part is about the consequent and main policy of Mao's rules in 1949 to 1976. Next. And we need to talk about the article first. It's about people, daily editorial citizens, widely named individuals for failing to understand that following the establishment of agricultural or cooperative in China, these were both the condition and the necessity for great leap forward in production. Mao is strongly agree with him in this point of view. Next. So in August 1959, the Chinese Communist Party had an enlarged board meetings in Beidahe, during which the central leadership laid out the major plans for the Great Leap Forward movement. At the Beidahe conference, the leadership concluded that after overcoming right-leaning conservative thinking, breakthrough had been achieved in agricultural technology, and agricultural production has seen a remarkable increase these years. So it was estimates that China's agricultural and grain issue has been largely resolved. Consequently, all levels of governments were instructed to shift their focus to industrial development. Next. But in reality, the harsh grain requires policies like the extremely low food ration for farmers. Most of the populations was required to hand over the majority of their grain. So, and local government went to great length to fulfill the grain quotas demanded by the central government. Although the state came east was purchasing only the farmers' supplies grain in practice. This left many unable to eat their fields. Next. So next is about the mass steel productions. One of the main policy of the Great East Powers, the conference decides to raise the 1958 steel output target from the original 6.2 million tons to 10.7 million tons. It also sets the 1959 steel production goals as 27 million tons with the ambition of reaching 30 million tons. However, by this point, it was already August 1958, and only 4 million tons has been produced, meaning that an additional 6.7 million tons would need to be achieved within just 3 or 4 months. These unrealistic targets will ultimately have disaster consequences for Chinese economy. So, with the agricultural weekends and lines in industries lines to fulfill priority steel production, the economic development of various sectors became severely unbalanced. The mass mobilization of labor of support to steelmaking campaigns also caused a great decline in agricultural productivity, ultimately leading to the Great Firms in 1959. Next. Next is about the cultural revolutions. The origins of the cultural revolutions has interpreted by many scholars, whether attributed to extreme factors such as the broader international community landscape or international one, nevertheless, the political mistakes made by the Chinese community parties during the Great East Powers and ultimately inseparable from Mao's suggest belief that it was necessary to reflect the cause of socialist development and just the lack of ideological unity within the party. Next. Regardless of the different interpretations, the formal declarations of the Cultural Revolution launch came on August 8, 1966, within adoption of the disease of the Central Committee of the Community Parties of China on the Great Cultural Revolution. So it's called 16 points at the 11th plenary sessions of the Central Committee, while the documents symbolize the need to overthrow those in power taking the capitalist road and name Mao Zedong force as the guide principle of the movement. The discourse that most significant influenced the Red Guy later campaigns was Article 9, which established development groups, so committee and congress. So next. So in response to Mao call, the West Sky launched top-down, organized at beginning in Beijing and separate nationwide under the slogan of Smash the Four O's and establish the fake news. They destroy historic and symbolize of capitalism and carry out violence as including public beatings, home raids, and even killing. Cause widespread destruction of life and property. According to research by private scholars, the number of unnatural deaths during the Cultural Revolutions is estimated to range from at least 1 million to at least many as 10 million. Next. Next. Conclusion. 对 conclusion. 对。
Right. So actually, as they cut the whole topic into how Mao Zedong is trying to make the whole PRC into a better country, and the stronger one, as they potentially want to be a hegemony, I'm going to cut into the part where it's an international role under Mao, from isolation to global revolutionary influence. And here we have three major events. There are actually outcomes, but I choose three. These three because they have the most significant influence throughout the whole era from 1950 to 1972. So the first one is talking about the Korean War. So actually, everyone definitely have heard about the whole situation during the Korean War, but little do they know that actually the main reason is because from June 1950, the war began when North Korea invaded South Korea. Although we know that geopolitically, actually, China and North Korea, they're very connected to each other. However, the thing is, why do they actually want to do the intervention in the Korean War? So first of all, the United Nations, led by the United States, actually intervened first to be supporting South Korea, which actually makes sense. And then the UN forces approached the Yalu River, which China saw this as a security threat. If you go on to your Google map right now or the previous one, you can actually see, as mentioned, geopolitically, China would see this as an international insecurity threat. So they have their own rights and they have their own reasons to be doing such. So, as the leader of the PRC, Mao Zedong decided to intervene, despite that CCP's recent consolidation of power is not actually that stable. But in order to let the world to know that you're actually in our territory, we have to see this as a security threat. That's why they intervened in the Korean War. Next. And then in 1950, China sent the People's Voluntary Army, which is called the PVA, into Korea. So the Chinese forces pushes UN troops to be going southwards, leading to a military stalemate, which this actually marked as China's rise as a global military power, trying to let the world to know that who is actually the boss of the world at that certain amount of time. And then, estimated of 2.5 million deaths, including many Chinese soldiers were sacrifices in the whole situation of the Korean War, where the Chinese are trying to push the UN troops as well as trying to claim their own power to the whole international community. And then it actually deepened the Sino-American hostilities and delayed Western recognition of the PRC, as well as it actually strengthened China's Cold War alignment with the Soviet Union. So basically lots of things happened at that period of time. And you can see it's not only about China is trying to show off their power, trying to maintain, trying to enhance their situation, no matter in their country or in international community, as well as they actually establish a kind of firm comfort relationship with the Soviet Union. Next. So the second one is talking about the Sino-Soviet split and the border clashes in 1960s. So actually, in the early alliance between PRC and the USSR, there is a deterioration by the late 1950s. And with that, actually, people are kind of not sure about what these two leaders are trying to do. But then, they were thinking about they would actually merge and try to help each other as the sake of the communism. However, the ideological rift is that Mao actually rejected Khrushchev's destabilization and peaceful coexistence with the West. This disagreement actually collapsed and, this disagreement actually happens and the whole topic actually overlaps the issue of nuclear cooperation and leadership of the global communist movement, which this actually kind of make people to be wondering why they would be actually de-escalating the whole situation, as they had such a very similar situation when talking about political decisions or strategy. And then, so this really culminated in the 1969 border clashes at Zhenbao Island. Next. Right, so basically this whole thing actually nearly escalated into a full-scale war because they led to the fracturing of the global communist bloc. Next. So the last one is actually about Nixon's visit to China and the rapprochement, and the whole thing is how the one China stance has been stated at that time. It opened the door to the U.S. future China diplomatic relationships, and then it shifted into the Cold War dynamics. And so the conclusion here is the legacy of Mao Zedong and the early PRC. So actually there remains a few more points, I'm going to just name some. First of all, it's about the end of the era, where it actually marks the closes of a transformative, a deeply turbulent chapter in the Chinese history. Second is talking about the political legacy, where it's a fully centralized power around one single leader that established one party authoritarian system that actually makes lots of people have been thinking what happened and why this kind of thing happened. And then the social impact is how it actually reshaped the whole Chinese society, with empowering the literacy, gender equality, and including other catastrophic situations. Next we have the economic aftermath, where Maoist economic scientists, especially after the Great Leap Forward, as mentioned previously, actually made the economy shattered, set the stage for later reform under the Deng Xiaoping's leadership in the beginnings of 1970s. Next, we have the global repositioning, where it brought China from isolating, which is the international part, into a strategy player in the Cold War diplomacy with the Soviet Union. And lastly is the historical ambiguity. So until this day, Mao remains a both revolutionary icon and a deeply polarizing figure, where his image and his legacy continues to shape China's policy, nationalism, and international perception in some ways that you possibly can see and cannot see. So that's all, and we'll go into the question part.
Because maybe we don't have enough time, so as a quick question, I don't know if teacher wants us to discuss. So there's still a culture of reverting Mao Zedong in China. So I'm wondering what people think about him, and maybe somebody knows there are still many people like Mao Zedong in China, but as we mentioned previously, Mao Zedong do a lot of things that when people die or like China's economy crash. So what do you think Mao Zedong's communist ideology is a help or the obstacle to China's current development, and why? This is our quick question after our presentation.
So thank you very much. Any takeover? Thank you. Yeah. 你是组长，组长是你，谁是组长？好像是你是组长。OK OK 好 OK OK 好 OK。Thank you very much. So thank you. I think the bigger question is that, is Chinese economy a communist economy? I mean, the basic question is this: is China still a communist country? I mean, especially in the economy. Actually, no. Yeah. Why not? Why not? Anyone? Yeah, please.
Yeah, like I think since the 80s of some kind, like they tried like the global markets of the world, and so yeah, their communism, I think, is more shown on other parts. Like they focus on some very specific parts of the communist ideology, but not on the like economical part of
Yeah.
communism.
Yeah. So, what is communism? What is the basic definition of communism? Yeah, please.
It's a stateless society where the means of production are owned by the workers.
Yeah. So the means of production 就是生产工具必须要是由人民所掌握。However, in China, what is a means of production? Land, capital,
humans, all of this is working just like a capitalism, right? Just like a capitalism. 就是在中国早就已经不是共产主义。However, if you look into everything in China, especially their law, their constitution, their party platform, or every speech of their leaders, they will stress, they will emphasize that we are a communist party, we are a communist country, and what is the Xi Jinping version of the 小红书? Do you know that? It is called 习近平新时代中国社会主义. Okay, so the quotation of Mao Zedong, the Red Book, right? You just mentioned here. In here we have a latest version of Xi Jinping. It's called, it's very long. 习近平新时代社会中国特色社会主義. The new era, the new characteristic of new century of China's communism of Xi Jinping. Okay, that is the latest version of the Red Book. What is it as a new characteristic of communism? That is, they're actually working on capitalism, on their economy. However, they emphasize on every dimensions of legal systems, of their constitutions, that they're still holding the communist ideology. They know exactly if it opens to capitalism, then it will democratize someday. Okay, they know this exactly. So they prevent of this kind of liberalism lead to democratization. Okay, 就是他们在经济上面虽然实际上已经非常像资本主义，可是他们非常知道说不能够全面的开放，所以他们在法律层面、制度、这个宪法啊什么的都强调共产党的控制。So that is why they establish the party branches in every company. They requires the total control of the Communist Party. Okay, so it still cannot be called as a capitalism because the party still controls everything, as long as the party wants. Okay, that is a very big difference. So, yeah. And also, there's something I need to mention here. Well, in the very beginning of ROC, Republic of China, well, by the way, my argument is that the Republic of China in mainland China and now in Taiwan is two separate countries. That is my argument. Maybe, I don't know whether we have time to discuss about that, but, well, okay, so the ROC in mainland China here, the basic, the central government is in Beijing actually. And that time, KMT in Nanjing, led by Sun Yat-sen, Sun Zhongshan, is actually a rebel. So they do not want to obey the legitimacy of the ROC in Beijing. So they have created another one. And Sun Yat-sen, in order to take more power and resource, cooperate with Soviet Union at that time. Okay. And then later on, Chiang Kai-shek just some kind of unify the most part of mainland China. In later, it's called Beifa. Okay. And the Long March, although it's called Long March, and actually it is kind of an exile, because that time Chiang Kai-shek just beat the Mao Zedong. Seriously, I mean, they just can. The only way they can do is just to escape from here to a long way, in a long way. So long march is a beautiful word to that memory. Okay, so actually this time it's already a civil war already, but Chiang Kai-shek just suppressed all of the opposition there. For the this is very interesting for the 百花齐放. Okay, the 100 flower campaign is 百花齐放is called that is that Mao Zedong just encourage everyone to criticize him or criticize the government, and then he can identify who are the oppositions, and then just crush both of them. Okay, so here you can see a very similarity here that if you want to open to criticism, then you can gather true information. So if you, well, that depends on the purpose of the leader, right? If you want to just purge all of the opposition, then you can do this. 就是在这个百花齐放的时候，就跟我们今天提到一样，就是你如果要获得真实的资讯，你就必须要开放一些言论自由。可是你开放之后，看你要做什么。你开放之后是可以获得真实资讯，你也可以就是把这些不喜欢你的人一网打尽。But that is how Mao Zedong just identified the oppositions and then crush all of them. Okay, and then he just controls, personalize the power. So, and then all of the following, including the Cultural Revolution and the chaos, the big family, well, the 大跃进, Great Leap Forwards, this is a tragic era in China. So millions, hundreds of millions of people just died that time. So again, it is called in BBDM is called bad behavior by the good politics, because Mao Zedong goes through all of this, but controls everything, consolidates the power. Okay. And where is Zhou Enlai? Yeah, Zhou Enlai here. But China is still in control. CCP is still in control because there's a very good one who leads the government. This is Zhou Enlai. And Zhou Enlai is also a genius as a diplomat. Okay, so besides the crazy man here, Zhou Enlai just controls and do all the business for CCP. Okay, so Zhou Enlai just cooperate with and convince the Western countries that they can cooperate with China. So then we have the following how how the U.S. just switch their diplomatic recognition with China. So it's called Zhou Enlai. Okay, and then and after Zhou Enlai and some chaotic time, they have Deng Xiaoping. So in dictatorships, it all depends on whether you can meet up with you can have a very good leader. So you depends on fortune. So for China, they are very fortunate that they have very good leader of Zhou Enlai and Deng Xiaoping, who established a very good system for them. Okay. However, if you do not meet with a good leader, you cannot even change that. You cannot even make party turnover for that. OK， 就是在独裁世界里面，你这个国家有没有发展好，其实你要看的是幸运，你有没有很幸运的拥有一个好的领导者。那如果你遇到不好的领导者的时候，你是没有办法换他下来。OK，but in democracies, we always have next chance to replace people or leader we don't like, or people who have some bad behaviors. Okay. So that's for all the presentations for today. Well, we have very limited time, so let me just go through this. So today we just talk about why the dictators are not going to rely on coercive institutions only, because there will be backfires from the masses and the elites, because you have a risk of military coup, because you have to give the coercive institutions more resources, and then these institutions will turn back to you. And there's need for good governments. You have to run the whole government. You have to have a good reputation. You have to cooperate with the Western countries, Western democracies. That is called legitimacy. So they use the institutions to pretend that they are open to a certain degree. Okay? So that is how we have the hybrid regime. So hybrid regime is that if we see democracy and authoritarian regime as a scale,
then the very liberal one, and very closed one. So we have some hybrid regime here. So some regimes have open to elections, and these elections can be very close to free elections. Some are called competitive authoritarian regime. That is, elections exist, but not fair, okay? Hegemonic electoral authoritarian regime is that maybe the elections is there, but that doesn't work. I mean, the political party, the ruling parties always win. Closed authoritarian regime is that there's no election, or there's no nominally democratic institutions. 就是因为独裁者有需要去治理国家，有需要去做一些 co-optation 的这个动作，所以在程度上会有不同。有些独裁者会很开放他们的选举，有些可能就是选举真的就是只有名目而已，就是像是北韩一样。那有些就是完全没有选举，例如说中国就是完全没有，所以就是会有一个程度之别。Okay. So how can we know whether institution works? Well, it's always very difficult to do research in authoritarian regime, but we have to see whether there's constrained power on the leader, or whether the legislature can make some opposition to the ruling party. Okay. Another question is how to make sure that the leader or elites comply, because there's no authority in authoritarian regime, right? So we see that if we want to make a deal with authoritarian regime or dictator, it always failed. So in today's, you mentioned in today's map, we see Tibet here. Actually, Tibet is the first country, the first place, the first territory, or the first regime to sign a deal with China, with Communist Party, that use the so-called one country, two systems. OK， 西藏是第一个使用一国两制的领土。OK， one country, two systems. Firstly, used in Tibet, and that only lasted for 7 or 8 years. Okay, so after 7 or 8 years, you sign a deal with CCP. Then CCP, the People's Liberation Army, just invaded Tibet, and then Dalai Lama just escaped to India, until today. Okay, so the lesson here is that you always cannot expect to make a deal with the dictators, because there's no one can enforce that deal. Okay. So that's always true, always true. So Tibet is the first one country, two systems, then Hong Kong and Macau. So Hong Kong is, CCP just promised to maintain the Hong Kong system for 50 years. However, it's only lasted for 20-something years and then destroyed everything, okay? So in Taiwan, we still have a lot of people promoting for signing a peace deal with China. Or you can see a lot of articles on major foreign policy magazines that promote for Taiwan to have making some deal or reassure China with some of the deal, peace treaty or something like that. That will all fail, okay? The history is very clear. Okay, the lesson is that we cannot always expect the dictators to comply with the institutions. So prerequisite of cooperation is that the whole system, people in the whole system comply. Everyone can get their interest in this system. So the key is credibility. So the elites surrounding the leaders will have some collective actions that can constrain the leader, and also the leader must have some credible mechanism to ensure that the institutions can persist. So that is how the political parties play the role. So because there's no institution can enforce the agreement. So the political parties, if there's a party and if there's a very clear rules that can make sure that everyone working in this system, then it will solve the problem of the comply problem. OK， 就是政党的功用就是在确定每一个人都可以在这个游戏规则里面，它可以让精英们确定他们可以有一起的集体行动去限制那个领导者。那领导者也可以用政党来保证说，我可以让大家一起在这个制度里面。So without a party, without a clear rules inside the regime, there's no credible mechanism that can make sure that everyone comply with this system. So political party and the power sharing is to resolve the problem of credibility. Okay, that's how the political parties are very important to the dictators. Okay, so here's a paragraph that I copied from my dissertation. So it describes the function of the political institutions. Okay, and according to Svolik, in Svolik's books, he mentions some of the features here to make a hierarchical assignment of service and benefits. That is to provide some of the motivations for everyone to climb up, okay? And also have a control over appointments. It's highly controlled by the top ones, the top officials, and selective recruitment and repression. So you have to show people that they have hope in this system, and also to show people that the machine, the party machine, or the ruling machine is very effective, to make them fear. And to make them, to tell people that the only way you have your political career is to join the party. That is how for example, in CCP or in another of dictatorship show, because their party only their party can win the positions. So the only way, if you want to join the political activities, that the only way is to join the party, to join the system, not to oppose them. Okay. Any questions? Yeah. Okay. So I'll just stop here. So please read the book, and then I will see you in 2 weeks. Okay. Also 就是请各组长，就是如果有公告的话，请各组长再帮忙发。Okay. Thank you.